So today we'll be talking about AWS migration and transfer strategies, right? And while we're talking about this topic, right, if you think about before now, we've been looking at a lot of areas in the cloud, right? So we've talked about storage, talked about compute, but if you were starting your cloud journey today, for example, maybe you were on-premise, right? And then think about all the things we've been learning as you doing exploration in the cloud. At some point you want to move whatever you had on premise to the cloud, right? So which is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. What are the options you have in terms of how you move your data? And when we talk about data is just one, people usually have massive servers that they need to move. Some people have like so many data centers that they need to transfer to AWS, database services that they need to move. So um, usually you do some sort of migration, especially if you were not cloud native, like if you were not you didn't start building in the cloud, right? So those are the things we're going to be seeing today. So we'll see the 6 R's. I think it's seven. I think it's seven I mentioned in the slide, but we'll see that, and then we'll see migration evaluator, how that helps us with assessment and planning. We'll see migration hub and what that looks like. We'll also see discovery service, and then we'll see the migration service itself, so application migration service. We'll see this disaster recovery strategy if you want to use the Elastic Disaster Recovery service. We'll also see AWS Backup, right? It's one of those services we've not talked about. We'll see it in this call, but they're all related, right? Sometimes you want to move data, and then when your data is also in the cloud, you want to back it up, right? So let's think about some of the, like I mentioned, I think the first slide is supposed to read seven, right? Because we have seven here. These are terms that you see. You hear them, you see them, right? If you're in the cloud, right? So let's just mention them. They are not hard to remember. So let's take the first one. You were already on premise, and now you want to move to the cloud. You basically can move your application as is to the cloud, and that's what you pretty much hear when they say rehost. It's more or less like you're taking it on premise, you are rehosting it in the cloud. Yeah? The one common term people use for that is lift and shift, meaning you're taking the application as is, you're just rehosting it in the cloud, right? So move application as is to the cloud. But if you see number seven, there is also relocate, right? So relocate is like rehost, but the only difference is that there you're moving the infrastructure. So whenever you think about moving the infrastructure just as is without any change to the cloud, you're doing a relocation. So you're relocating. And then re-platform, you're pretty much doing some minor changes. You're just more or less like doing some minor optimization to the application that you're trying to move, right? So you're doing the lift, you're reshaping a little bit, not so much, not so much. Maybe you're just using, for example, maybe you instead of using your own database, you're using RDS. But if you think about RDS that we've mentioned, RDS is still relational database, right? Nothing is going to change. It's just that maybe you're using a different platform entirely to host whatever you're moving to the AWS cloud, right? But refactor, obviously, as the word entails, you have to re-architect, right? So that would require you to do some shift. Maybe you were doing non-serverless, now you're trying to move it to a serverless architecture. So that one will take much time, right? So redesign, there is like the redesigning required at the refactor level, right? So which is you're more or less like redesigning for you to suit what cloud provides as opposed to how you've been operating. And then you can also do repurchase, right? So you drop if you are using, and if there's something you can already buy in the cloud, you just buy that. So it's more or less like you just move to the SaaS option. And there are many ways you're going to use that, right? Maybe you had Sentry that you are using, maybe you're hosting yours, and then you move to the cloud. You can actually buy like a Sentry version, like a SaaS solution for Sentry, right? And just use that. And there are many examples like that. And then you can also retain. Retain means keep on premise for now, like just keep it for now. Maybe you can choose what you want to do with it later, right? So retain so that you can revisit it at some point. And then sometimes there are some things that will not move to you when you go to the cloud. That's the truth. So I think, like I did mention, I remember as part of my experience joining a company that had like so many things on premise. But when we did the migration to the cloud, we had to drop a lot of them, right? Some of those things, it's not like they are not good, but they were no longer needed for especially in regards to how things now worked in the cloud. We didn't need them again. So sometimes you just retire some things, you just decommission them. You will not have to use them, right? So when you think about the factors, sometimes is you think about cost, right? You also think about the complexity, you think about the timeline, right? If you're trying to migrate, you won't just be thinking about re-architecting everything at once. Sorry, I think this is not, there's a slide here that is not showing properly. Let me just zoom my page in a bit. Good. So if you think about the cost, complexity, timeline, those are some of the things you need to consider. Because if you think about re-architecting, if you want to do your migration in 2 weeks or like in a month or 2 months, that's not when you should be talking about refactoring, right? Because you are thinking about refactoring, you have to change a lot of things the way you are implementing. So depends on the timeline and also complexity. Some applications are easy to refactor, but some not very easy. Also cost-wise, right? Some, depending on which route you take, might cost you more, and some will cost you less. So you have to think about all those factors for you to choose. Remember, we're still talking about you were on premise and now you're moving to the cloud. Oh, the cloud is good. You're moving to the cloud. You have many of these options that you have to do as part of the process to know what am I lifting and shifting, what am I replatforming, what am I refactoring, what am I repurchasing. You have to weigh all that into your existing solution. And these things come in form of like cost, complexity, timeline, and then business criticality also. How critical is some areas when you compare them to some other areas? And then compliance, right? And we've talked about compliance, how it drives many decisions you also make in the cloud. And then, technical depth, modernization goals. So if you have like, maybe you want to modernize now, you just don't want to take some of the bad practices you have. You don't want to move them to the cloud, and you just want to do it some kind of modernization immediately before you move. Some people will choose to go that route and say, oh, we don't have issues with the timeline. We'll take our time to do what is right? So all these options are there. So when we now look at it, there's just a diagram here. There is also a link that you can pretty much see, but it just gives you really everything that I've mentioned, right? There is really, it's more or less like a pictorial diagram that shows you, you're doing discovery, you're doing some assessment, and then you are determining more or less like a migration path. That's exactly what I have in this diagram. And then from there, you can choose what you're relocating, what you're refactoring, and what decisions, what is basically informing that, right? And honestly, you should also understand it's always dependent on the business, right? There is no one size fit all. It depends on your business case. Some people will choose to rehost, some people will choose to replatform. It just depends on how much time you have and what you are considering. So this diagram is here. There is a link here that will lead you to a blog post on AWS that shows you, all the parts. And then what you see, starting from discovery at the leftmost to the rightmost, you have production, right? Production in the cloud. And it just shows you some of the things you might need to do to get there, right? Cool. So when we now think about it, where do we start from? So, and that's where there is a service called AWS Migration Evaluator, right? The point is that if you think about it, so if I go back to the original slide, you see that it actually starts from an assessment. There is an assessment stage that happens in the course of you migrating, right? So there is a service called Migration Evaluator that can help you do the assessment. So it's an assessment service for on-premise infrastructure planning. The whole idea is you're on-premise and you want to move to the cloud. AWS Migration Evaluator can help you do that assessment. And the whole idea is basically trying to tell you what it's going to cost you. It's giving you an estimate of what it's going to cost you. It has to assess your current on-premise setup and then look at what that is going to, correlate to in the cloud. And then, you can actually see the benefit, whether it's going to cost you more or it's going to cost you less. So that comes in first, right? Because you're doing more or less like an assessment in this case. And it's usually one of the first steps, right? So that do I even need to make the move or not? Because from an assessment, you can actually tell if it's going to be more costlier for you to be in the cloud or cheaper. And some people, it's not even about cost. Some people might have the reasons why they want to be in the cloud. It's not about money. So obviously, if you look at many of the migration tools that we'll see in AWS that helps with migration, there is a data collection stage. So Migration Evaluator is also not an exception. There is a stage where you do an agentless data collection that helps you gather that information that you need, right? So it helps you see the servers that you have, whatever is running inside of them, and can do that comparison, right? So detailed analysis of current utilization and the optimization opportunities that you can also get if you choose to move to the cloud. So there will be recommendation as part of it. So right sizing recommendation is one of the things you see. Cost comparison. So compare what you currently have on premise with what it will look like in the AWS environment, right? And then migration timeline and strategy recommendations, all that can come. That's why it's like an evaluator. It's a service that you can use. So business case development with return on investment analysis. Return on investment, exact, because if you're trying to move from on-premise, you have to factor in cost and other things, right? And as we'll see, most of them integrate with Migration Hub, which is where you actually track your entire project, right? Whether you're doing discovery or you are doing the actual migration or you are doing evaluation, all that, you can see everything in Migration Hub. So just so you know, I mean, this service is there. You need to understand it as one of the services you should know it exists in AWS. But it depends. If you find yourself doing some large scale migration, you will definitely see this service. So it's good to familiarize with yourself with it, right? So when we now think, after talking about migration evaluator, right, you've done assessment. So that's like you're doing an assessment, you've gotten to a point where you now say, okay, I want to move to the cloud actually. I think I've done this analysis, this assessment, it looks good. That would move you to the next service, which is like a discovery service. The whole idea is that you can actually now use a discovery service to plan the migration, right? What does it do? It discovers your on-premise applications and their dependencies. So you can actually use the discovery service to look at your on-premise, what you have set up on-premise, and then collect basically data from your on-premise data, from your on-premise applications and servers, and then you can use that to plan your migration, right? So you collect server utilization data and configuration information. We're going to see this one because this one is easy to show, right? We obviously see this one. So it will collect the server's utilization data and configuration information. It's basically collecting all the data, the key things, information that you need from your servers, right? So your CPU utilization, the memory, all that kind of information, just to help you to give you inform you in terms of like, if you were choosing to go to the cloud, it's easy for you to see like more or less like match or recommendation, right? So you can do agentless and you can also do agent-based discovery methods. We'll see agent-based in this call, but you can also do agentless, right? Agentless just means you don't need to install. In this case, we'll install an agent on the machine to do that discovery, but you can also go agentless mode, and that is basically for VMware, not like installing on a physical machine, right? The major job there is really provides migration planning data and cost estimates, because you've done evaluation to tell you, okay, it's feasible, and then here you're doing discovery to see what you have and see more or less like your planning, and then it can also help you with cost estimate. Okay. So after discovery, what do we do? That's when there is the migration service. So you discover, and then once you're good to go, you can do migration. But one thing you need to understand is that application migration service is a lift and shift migration, right? So the whole idea is that you had something working on premise, you've done your evaluation, it looks good to go. You've done your discovery, you've been able to plan, you've been able to see the machines that it's going to correspond to. When you move to the cloud, you've done all your cost estimate and everything, and now you're good to go. This is the service that would help you. Just take the machine as they are on premise, it's going to move it to the cloud as is, right? So it's lift and shift. Remember, it's one of the 7 R's that we just mentioned. One of it is really just lift and shift. You don't need to do anything. Just take it as is from on premise and move it to the cloud. Don't remove anything. Just take it as is, right? So it does continuous block level replication with minimal downtime, automated server conversion and non-disrupting testing. So the whole idea is that it takes the exact server that you have, it creates like a replication stage, and if you're good with whatever is happening from the testing, you can do a cutover to what your exact server spec should look like. So it does all the planning for you, and it's a very painless process, right? You just install the agent, and because it's easy for one machine, but when you have so many machines that you want to move, and that's why there's this service. So the whole idea, you can deploy agents on those machines, and then you can use them to basically wire up the migration. Replaces AWS Server Migration Service with enhanced capabilities. As we'll see again in this, most of the services that we're mentioning, whether it's the evaluator, whether it's the discovery, whether it's the migration service themselves, they all connect with the Migration Hub, which is the next service we're going to see. And when we go to the UI, it becomes more relatable, right? So what is now the Migration Hub? Remember, we talked about Evaluator. Evaluator is you're doing assessment from the beginning, right? That's like at the business level. You're trying to see, is this migration worth it? Discovery, you're using it to discover all the servers that you have on premise, right? In preparation for you to do the actual migration. And there are many things that will come, because from there you can see recommendation of the EC2 instances that your on-premise machine is going to correlate to, right? Once you're done with that discovery, the next level is really to do the migration, which is the migration service that we've seen. But there is also a hub. I think if you remember, we saw security hub, right? And we saw that security hub wasn't just like one service that did its own special thing. It's basically a place, a hub for you to see other security tools. It's the same with the migration hub. So whenever in your journey, when you see hub, most times AWS uses it for more or less like a place where you can see services, like and collectively see many services. So in this case, centralized. So it's centralized location now to track everything, right, around your migration, right? So whether it's the discovery process, whether it's the actual migration, you're just tracking all that using Migration Hub, right? So single dashboard for migration process visibility, you'll see all that in Migration Hub. It integrates with discovery service that we just saw and the migration service, right? Discovery, you're discovering, you can track that in Migration Hub. The migration itself, you still can track that in Migration Hub, right? So you can see it provides migration status and status updates and recommendations. And those are things you see in the UI. The key features you can track. So there's like a dashboard for you to see real time what is happening around your migration, right? You can do application grouping, because the thing is that when you bring all your on-premise machines to the cloud, they are just machines, or you have to group them, right? So you organize them, group them into application. Maybe you call some databases, maybe you call some. The reason is because when you're implementing the actual migration, sometimes you want some data, maybe the databases, you want them to go to a private subnet, right? Maybe you want the web servers to go to like a public subnet, and that's where grouping can work for you, because now you can group them and then you can choose what kind of machines are they going to correspond to, what kind of subnet are they going to end in, and all that. So, and then you can obviously integrate that with AWS Migration Service and other partner tools that is out there. Cost tracking and optimization insight throughout the migration. So the hub is just basically everything that's going to happen within your migration. The hub is where you're going to be seeing it real time, okay? And the automated discovery and assessment capabilities. So we'll see many of these once we go to the UI. So let's just let's go to the UI so that you can see some of these things, okay? So we're here. I'm just going to go to the service. The first service, there's only one. We'll just do one service. We're not really. I mean, migration service is obviously like, the migration service itself is a bit advanced, but the discovery service is more or less like approachable. But they are all not very hard, right? Once you understand how they work, you understand that it's not really hard. You just you know there are a couple of steps to take, right? So we won't go too deep into some of those services for now. But this is the hub I just talked about. So there is this hub, which is where everything happens, and you can see. Let me zoom in a bit so that it's clear. And you can see on the left there is really Discover, right? Which is the discovery service we talked about. There is Discover, and then there is also the Migrate itself, which is where the actual migration will take place, right? So you can see things like applications. I don't have any at the moment. I don't have any EC2 instance recommendation. These are the things that would happen once there is a discovery. So what we're going to do is that I'm in US West 2. So I'm going to open EC2 in a different region, and I'll just fake like I'm trying to actually do a discovery, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to um, North California. In this case, just think about it that I'm trying to fake a migration, right? Ideally, I mean, it has to be, most times it's on-premise to the cloud, right? But in this case, I'm just trying to use a different region to act like my on-premise. So yeah, I'm going to launch an EC2 instance. I think I'm just going to launch an EC2 instance. I'll call it my web server. I think this is standard stuff. I'm not going to say, I'm not going to talk too much about what I'm doing. I'm just going to do this. My web server, I'm going to give it Linux 2023, T2 Micro is fine. I'll proceed without a key pair because I don't really need to SSH into the machine. I don't even need to allow any of this. I'll leave it GP3 and 8 GB, just the default. Here, I'm going to select the instance profile, and I'm going to use the, what do you call it? I have an EC2 instance, my EC2 role here. Just know that EC2 has the SSM manager permission, right? So I can SSH into the machine. I can pretty much get into the machine using systems manager. And that's why I'm not enabling SSH, right? That's standard stuff. We've gone through that over and over again. So with that all said, I think I have a user data script I want to run through it. So let me just push a user data script, even though that's really not the so I think we've used this user data script for most of our training, most of the training, right? So just install HTTPD, just basic welcome page. Okay. This could be a real server that is on premise that you want to migrate to the cloud. In this case, we're just using, we're putting it in a different region. Remember, if you scroll up, I'm actually doing this from, I'm doing it from, I think it's, yes, US West 1. Okay. So this is launching on one hand, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now go here. One thing you do is if I type application, if I type discovery, just so you know, let's say discovery. Yeah, so application discovery service. One thing you notice that if I click on application discovery service, it takes me to Migration Hub, right? So it takes me to Migration Hub. But if I come here and I type migration service, um, application migration service, it has its own different UI entirely. Like it has its own different page. So you can see it's like its own, you can discover, you can monitor. It has its own page, but it has integration with Migration Hub that we've seen. I think AWS, this is this DMS. I think this is DMS I'm looking at right now. We've talked about DMS at some point, right? So that's database migration service. It's specifically for database. In this case, we're talking about a whole like machine, like you want to migrate a complete server, right? So I'm going to do migration service. I'm not sure that's where I went to before. So if I do, okay, I think I clicked the first one. Database migration service is actually different. I actually want to go to application migration service, right? So there, you see, it's kind of different from is outside. What do you call it? It's outside Migration Hub, right? So if you see, discovery is still part of Migration Hub, but migration service itself is different. But like I mentioned in the slide, it has integration, right? So in here, you can actually see your tools. So you can see discovery tool, discovery agents, evaluator, collector. These are all tools. But apart from that, you can actually now have data sources. Sorry, there's migrate. So this is hub, right? And you can see there's a migrate part here. And this migrate part is how it links back to application migration service, right? So the hub itself is really where you're doing all the tracking, right? So let's go to, what do you call it? So let's go to discover. So we'll do application. In this case, we don't really have any application, and that's where the grouping comes in. So usually you have servers, and from servers, you convert them to more or less like an application. It's just like a group. You can say this is my web servers, it's my databases, right? So here I'm just going to go to servers. I'm going to import, I'm going to go to tools. The thing is, I'll go to tools. So I didn't go to servers, right? Servers are going to be things I have discovered. But I need to actually go to tools. So this is migrate tools. Migrate tools has application migration service, database migration service, but that's not where I'm going to. I'm actually going to the tools that is up here. So discover tools, right? And it gives me different options. You can have agentless discovery, discovery agents, migration evaluator, right? So if you wanted to do evaluation that you saw in the slide, there's something you can also install on the machines that can help you gather the evaluation. In this case, we're going to be doing discover agent, like discovery agent, right? So in this case, I want to do it via the Linux CLI, right? So if I do this, it gives me a couple of options, right? So it gives me a couple of options. It says I just need to do this. I need to do like a tar, which is more or less like to decompress the file, and then I'll basically run an installation script. But here is where it's asking me, it says I need to put an AWS key ID, and I need to put a secret. So before this call, what I've done is that I've created a user. But again, that should be standard stuff. So I'll show you the user that I created. I have a user here. I'll show you the user that I have. I called it Evaluator, right? So it's a user, and I did give it a set of policies, right? So if I was to do the migration, I'll use this second policy that is down here, right? But if I was to use the one that I want to show right now, I'll be using the discovery agent access, right? Basically, it's just a policy that allows the agent to do exactly what it needs to do, because in this case, I want to install an agent on the machine. So what I'm going to do, let me still zoom this a bit so that you can actually see the roles that I have there. But if you see it clearly, it's one is discovery agent access, and the other one is migration. The one that I'm demoing here is the discovery agent access. So what I'm going to do is, so this, so what it means is that this user, this user already has the right policy, right? But if you look at the tool, it says I should run these two instructions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to where I was before. I think I was in a different region. So let me search for EC2 and go to that region and go and find out EC2, right? I need to do the installation. Just go with the installation step. So I'll go to US West 1 and I'll look for the instance, right? So I'll do instances. Yeah, this one is running, so it's good to go. I'm going to connect. You know why I can connect with Session Manager? Because I already have an IAM role that has the SSM call, right? So I'll do that. I'll connect. Now that I'm connected, so I'm already in the bash now. I think it's still trying to connect, but I'm in. So I'm just going to, so I'm in as the root. Now that I'm here, I'm just now going to go through the instructions. So I'll do this. I'll just copy this as is, copy, and then I'll paste it here. Remember, in this account, I'll just need to follow the steps that I have. So in this case, that's install the file. And the next step will be for me to do a decompression. So I'm going to do this. Let me just do this. What's that file called again? Let me just be sure I'm seeing what I want to see. So it's discovery. So let me search for discovery. Yeah, it's here. So it's here. The next thing it wants me to do is said I should do bash install. Then I should put my access key ID and then my access key this. So I'm just going to do this. I'm going to delete this after the call. So I'm sharing it here because obviously the key requires just for you to do just one thing. So I don't really, but after the call, obviously I'm going to delete the user. So it's not going to be useful after this call. But while you're on the call, I'm just going to go into that users here. I'm going to do security credentials. I'll create a new access key, right? So I'll create a new one and I'll say I want to use this one for the CLI, so command line interface. It wants me, ideally you're not meant to use access keys, right? But in this case, just for the sake of this demo, I'll show you. So we'll create one, I'll just call it discovery. It's for the, sometimes it's good for you to name them. So discovery agent is what I want to use this one for. So I'll create the access key. I'm going to copy the key itself here. I'll paste it in a notepad that I have somewhere. I'm going to copy this ID also, the key itself and the ID. And then I'm going to go back to where it was before. I'm going to take this instruction. I'll copy this. And then in my other terminal, I'm just going to fill in the details. But don't worry, once I'm done, I'm going to bring it back to where you can see it. So I'm just going to copy this, paste it as is there, paste, and then copy this one also and paste it. And then I'm going to copy the entire command and then bring it back to where we were before. So I'm just going to go to Systems Manager, and then I'm just going to clear my screen, and then I'm going to paste. Control C, sorry, paste the command. So if you notice what I've done is exactly the command that they have there, but I just replace the, if you see after K, after, is it K or R? Dash K, yes, after dash K, there is really my key ID and then my key secret, right? So once I have that, I'm going to click enter, right? So it says finish phase, installing agent, cannot blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But the most important thing is that I've executed the command that I was given. So I'm just going to give it time. So what I'm just going to do is maybe just go and check my servers, right? So ideally, I'm just going to go here and just give it some time. But after a while, ideally my machine should appear on the other side, right? If we give it some time. Remember, this is the discovery phase, right? So this is like discovery. You're trying to see, ideally, if you were on premise, this is easy if you wanted to install it for so many machines, right? Maybe you were using Ansible, for example. You run this script on all your machine, install the agent, and then all of them will start sending data to AWS. the whole idea is that you can use that to do an assessment of your current workload, like where are things currently, how many databases do you have, what kind of databases do you have, what kind of OS are they using, your machine. This is where you're going to be seeing all that information, right? So I'm just going to give it some time. It's going to do its thing, um, and then well, I'm just going to give it some time. On the other side, it's going to by installing your current runner, blah, 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 was created to install agent version. In most cases, versions should be same. Cool. Um, so basically what we did was we started a discovery process that we got, and then we executed all the commands, and then we're just waiting for the agent, basically our machine in this case. Think about it, this machine is an on-premise machine. Now I'm just waiting for it to appear on the other end, right? So that it becomes useful to me. Sometimes it takes some time, and that is exactly why I can't really show you the migration, the one that is down here, the migrate, because it takes time. You're doing an actual migration, so first of all it will replicate the data, and then from there, so it takes time. So some of those things are not things that are easily shown on a call like this, but let's give it some time. um, as you can see, before these, I've replicated some before. You can see, for example, this was the details that I did get. So let me just even go through one of the examples that I've done before while we're waiting for that one to come. But it's as simple as just going through the instructions that we went through. But like a typical example is that it will tell you things about the machine, right? So it tells you the OS name, the CPU type, how much disk is free, total RAM, right? You need all this information because if you are on premise and you're trying to go to the cloud, these are the kind of information you want to know. How many CPUs are you likely going to be using? It tells me the hypervisor that is running in there, the host name, all these details are there. It tells me, it can even give you an average, like this is the average CPU, this is the maximum, this is the average RAM usage, this is the maximum, um, in this case, export server details, I'll come and try this one later, but okay, yeah, this is just, if I do export server details, I think we're just going to be exporting these details, right? But it's good. You can want to do some analysis and some planning on that. So let me go to servers. Yeah, so it was nice we were looking at that, but if you notice the server is here. Let me check just to be sure of which of the machines we are. I think it's 17.2, right? So it's 17.2. So it's this one that is here. So what I'm just going to do here is I'm just going to do, so I'm actually supposed to be, so I'm in servers, discover. So I'm just going to do this. Where is it now? Not started yet. So click on it, actions. Where are you again? Let me see, applications. Discover agents. So if you think about it, this is the one that we just brought in, right? So this one has been shut down. Obviously, I did this one at some point, but this is the new one, right? So what we can do is that, remember, we're still collecting data in this case. We're more or less like doing a discovery. So what I can do is here, go to the machine, and then right now it's actually collecting data. So right? The agent is on it. So which is exactly the step you're going to take. You have all your on-premise machines on. You have your on-premise servers. They could be 1,000, 2,000. It doesn't matter. The most important thing is that if those agents are installed with the right permissions and everything set up correctly, they'll start reporting their data to the AWS discovery service, right? So as you can see in this case, I can actually stop data collection if I'm done, but it will collect data, and you keep collecting that data over a period of time just for you to understand, what your workload is like. But if I go to servers, I actually wanted to see, if I actually want to click in. So this is the one that I just brought in, right? So this is 17.2. You can see network. You can actually see it, here. So if you had many machines, you can actually visualize them in this place to see the connection and how the machines are actually connected to themselves, right? Right now we just have one, and that's the one that is showing here. What other things can we do? So here you can actually create an application of that server. Maybe you want to group them. So you can say, this is my web server. You can put them in one group, right? That's like some of the organization that you do at some point. For data collectors, remember we were using discovery agents in this case. It's here, it's collecting, it's healthy, so it's good for us. And then for tools, I think we've looked at tools before. So what we can also do, we can actually do, for example, we can do maximum utilization if I wanted to do sizing preference, right? Because here I actually want to generate more or less like a recommendation so that you see what that will look like. So I can do export recommendation. Remember that this one just started. I don't know if it was able to generate everything that we need, but let's see. So what I'm just going to do, I'm just going to do sheets.google.com, and then I'm going to try to open, I'm just trying to be sure which file is this. So it's here. Let me see if I can actually open it in this. So blank, and then I'm just going to open, I'm just going to go to file, open, and see if I can find that. So upload from my computer and see if I can find that file. So what is it called? Let me see. It's under downloads. uh, Let me see if I can just paste this into this URL, right? So do this, right? Yeah, so it's here. So I really want us to see the recommendations, right? So I'm going to open the recommendations. Did I just click on that? Yeah, it's loading actually. So let me just, I think it's loading. So let's give it some time. So I have it here. So what I'm going to do is remember this is basically all the things I got from the agents, right? Replicating, discovering data on my behalf. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to tools and tools. I think I have data here. I can actually format and do convert to table, so that I just present it nicely. But the whole idea is that you can take this, right? The good thing is you can also see this in Athena, but here you can actually have an Excel sheet where you can see exactly, number of CPUs, number of processors. But again, at the end of the day, you can actually now see, and that's why I opened the one that had recommendation, because here you can actually see recommendation, right? So recommendation ec2.instance.os type. So this is the OS type that is being recommended. This is um, the pricing, hourly, on demand, and then what other things you can actually see the recommended. Remember, I did install a T2 micro, but for the recommendation, we should be using a T3A.micro, right? This, because if you, one of the questions will be, you have so many servers on prem and now you want to move to the cloud. How do you choose which machine? You can do all that from here. You can do that planning, and then once the planning is good and you're fine, that's when you now involve the migration service itself. Migration service is also very straightforward to follow that flow. You install a replication agent on the machine, it will bring them to AWS, and then at some point after the replication, you can basically move them to a test instance. After testing, you verify that it's working, you can call them over to your production. The point is that it's all easy, right? It's all easy. So people who are on premise, this is exactly how most of them are moving to the cloud. So this will shift your exact server as is and just move it to the cloud for you. Okay. So we've talked about the evaluator. So if you think about the tool, evaluator is also so if you think about the tools we looked at, there is an evaluator here. It's really, you can request an assessment. So what does it do? It's basically you're requesting to do like an assessment, right? So you install some set of things on your on-premise system, and then it's going to do a major assessment for you before you even start this. Because at the point where you're doing discovery, it's like you've started work already, right? But evaluator can actually help you, give you an idea of what it's going to cost you if you have to do your migration. Cool. So we've seen 4 services, right? So the first one, we talked about evaluator, and then we talked about discovery service, and then migration service, and then we also now talked about the migration hub, which is the UI that I'm looking at that brings everything together, right? But you can always see your servers. You can see them here. So what I can actually do, I can go to tools. I can go to data collectors and go to my discovery agents. I can actually go back here and say stop data collection, right? Maybe I don't need to collect data again. And then I'm going to go back to, just like I promised, I'm going to go back to that user. I have those users here. This one, I really don't need it again, the evaluator user. Deactivate the keys, confirm it. It's best practice you make sure you stay vigilant. So that user is gone. I'm just going to go and delete that instance. I don't really need it. I just wanted to show you that you can discover it. You can gain information about exactly what the machine is using, whatever is installed on it, and you can replicate it in the AWS if you are using that as part of your migration. Okay, cool. So we've looked at that. What is the next service we're looking at? We're now looking at some of the disaster recovery strategies that are in the cloud, right? So let's talk about it. We've just talked about, we've been exploring the cloud before now, right? And now we've just looked at what it will take for us to move what is already on premise to the cloud, right? But when you're in the cloud, what do you think is going to happen? At some point, you want to do disaster recovery. You want to more or less like back up your data. Recovery is a big deal, right? And there are key considerations that are listed in there that I really want to start with. Instead of talking about the four strategies, I'm going to start with the key consideration. One of the things you will never stop hearing is recovery time objective, right? So recovery time objective is basically how fast do you want to recover, right? How fast do you want your recovery to be? Should you be should everything be recovered in an hour or in 30 minutes, right? So depending on how fast you want to recover would also determine your disaster recovery strategy that you need to have, right? There is also the recovery point objective, meaning the point there is what you are taking note of, right? So there's time, right? So how fast? So time is how fast should that recovery happen? But there's also point, like how much data loss is acceptable, right? So it's more or less like I have backed up data, but how much back in the past can I go? So something happens now and the system is corrupted, like how far in the past should I be able to go? Sometimes some people have like 1 hour to say, we want to be able to go back. We want to be able to at least be able to go back just 1 hour. We can't. We want to be able to. So it means that if you want to go 1 hour, that means you have to be able to retain at least hourly backups, right? But again, how fast can also be. We'll now decide, okay, what kind of strategies do you want to have? Because if you're saying you want to be, in 30 minutes, you want to be back up, then that would also factor in the strategy you're choosing, right? So, and that's why I'm starting with the key consideration, because after talking about the key consideration, you would appreciate the strategies, right? So remember, RTO is how fast you want to recover. And then RPO is really how much data loss do you want to accept, right? So it means that I'm okay. I'm okay to accept like, an hour. So the last backup I had was an hour ago, and now something happened. I've not had a new backup. I'm okay to go just take 1 hour of loss, right? And how fast is really RTO telling you how fast do you want to recover? Like how fast do you want to be live again if something crucial happened with your data? So, and the considerations are always cost versus availability, right? So it means there are many things you want to trade off here, but cost is one of it, because when you see the different strategies, you know that some will cost you money to behave like that, but some would also guarantee your RTO is very, very fast, right? But those trade-offs are what will now help you choose a strategy to use. So let's look at the four strategies. One is backup and restore. That one is easy. Whether you're in the cloud or you are not in the cloud, backup and restore is something. We all do backups in one way or the other, right? You store things and then you restore it at some point. Maybe the hard drive goes. You can, whenever you do like storing in the cloud, you lose a phone and then in another phone you bring it back. To me, that's just like backup and restore, right? So if you think about it, it's lowest cost. It's not the most expensive, but it has the highest RTO, RPO, hours to days, depending on how your setup is. And it's understandable, right? Because if you do a backup, you have to do a restore. Some of those restore can take time. It will eat into your RTO. It will also eat into your RPO, right? Remember, I've talked about RPO and RTO below, so I'm not going to bother talking about them. And that's why I started from the key consideration before going to the strategies. Now, when you're not thinking about strategies, there's pilot light. Pilot light is really core systems are ready, and then you can have more or less like your core systems, right? So that there's like a light version of your infrastructure, more or less like your core systems. They are somewhere running in a light manner, and then you can pretty much just boot up the other parts that are not really core, right? So it's like pilot, but it's light. But when you now see, there's also like a warm standby. Warm standby is like scaled down replica, near real-time recovery in a minute. So if you think about the first one, tens of minutes. Obviously, as we go down, the faster as we go down, it becomes faster to recover compared to the first one. Backup and restore obviously will take you more time. Pilot light is obviously you have like your core systems are ready, but the other non-core systems you still need to bring them up, right? So it will still take you some more time. Warm standby is like there's a standby. It's just that maybe many of your replicas, instead of scaling at maximum, they are probably just low. You're not using like the maximum replica that you need to use. But it means that to some extent you still can you still can do near real-time recovery, but it's still going to take you time. And then there's really the multi-site active. That's really like you have full capacity, right? One is running on the left, the other one is running on the right, and then you can just do failover. So it's more or less like a complete replica of one of the systems. So full capacity, immediate failover, and it can happen in seconds. And why you choose any of these is basically your RTO and your RPO, right? There is no one size fit all. Depending on your RTO, your RPO, you choose which of the strategy you are going to use. This is just me, just opening your mind to some of the things you are going to see there. Because when you start hosting in the cloud, sometimes you want to say something goes wrong in one region. How do we go back to business? And how much data loss are we willing to accept, right? So all these things will help you plan appropriately. So that brings us to another service. We just talked about the strategies that are there, right? Some of them are not easy to implement. You have to think about infra-wise how to get them done, right? Because it means it's just like if you want to do active. It's like keeping an entire copy somewhere separately, right? And then trying to make sure that if one goes down, you can just switch over. But it requires some setup and some organization. But there is also AWS Backup if you wanted to do the backup and restore. So AWS Backup will do centralized backup services. It will do centralized backup for you. So it's a centralized backup service across AWS service. We'll see. It's very easy to approach. Policy-based backup with automated scheduling, meaning, you can schedule those backups and you can basically have them run at a given time. You can also do cross-region and cross-account backup capabilities. The point is that you can move backup from one place to another, right, from AWS Backup. Why is backup necessary? Sometimes compliance. Sometimes it could be your own personal needs in terms of like you want to make your your RTO and your RPO needs, but sometimes also compliance. If you work in some industries, it's expected you meet some compliance need, and that's why you need to keep back. You have to keep backup, right? So just outside even disaster recovery, if you think about compliance, backup is also important, right? So it supports a lot of services, and then you can have backup plans, with lifecycle management and retention policies. Retention policies is just how long do you want to keep those backups. Those backups sometimes are incremental, and for that reason, you can choose how long do you want to keep a particular backup, right? Point-in-time recovery in some cases is supported, and then incremental backups also. You can do backup vaults, encryption, and access control. And then you can actually do integrate it with AWS organizations for centralized backup governance. So AWS organization, I think, just so you know, everything will be doing its accounts level. But when we start introducing AWS organization, you can do all that. Like you can do a lot of these things at a centralized layer. Okay. So let's go to our account. So I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm going to go to so this is obviously terminated, and that's exactly what we wanted. So I'm going to go back to my default region. I'm just going to go to US Quest 2. And then in there, I'm just going to search for AWS Backup. So I'm just going to search for backup. So these services, I mean, they are exactly what they are meant to do. Here there's like a dashboard. So before I'd already created like a backup, so I won't want us to go through. Is it this region that I created it, or which one now? Let me check this region. I know I created a backup before now. Let me see backup plan. Okay, I do have one here. So I created one, just so we don't go through the process of like creating one. But what's a backup plan? The backup plan will basically, you create a plan and then you create a set of rules. If I look at my example rule here, it basically says it's going to be weekly. So let me zoom this in a bit so that I can see it. It says the frequency is going to be weekly, exactly when it's going to be happening. It's going to start, when it's going to start, when it should complete, number of retention that I should have, backup vaults. I'm using the default, you can have your own vault. You can do, if you want to archive the EBS snapshot, you can do transition to cold storage. Yeah, all that is some, more things we can talk about AWS backup. But the whole idea is that you can create a backup plan, and then in there you can create a rule. But the most important thing here is really an assignment, right? You can assign a set of resources based on the criteria to a backup rule or a backup plan, right? So what it means is that you can do, for example, the assignment. In this case, you can see I'm doing everything, I'm doing all the volumes. So in this case, it's EBS volumes, right? And I'm saying the ones where the name is equal to backup. And if I go to EBS, So I'm going to go to EC2. I'll show you one volume that I have there so that you see what's all about. So if I go to volumes, right now you see that okay, I think the snapshot that was taken for me has been deleted because I did do like a day retention. But if you notice this volume, if I click on it and I go to tags, one thing you notice, and I think someone has asked me before, why do you need tags? This is one place where tag is becoming handy because here I'm saying I'm creating this rule for you to back up every 1 hour, but back up the volumes that meet this tag criteria. In this case, I'm saying it has a name and the name is equal to backup. So with that, I'm doing like a resource assignment to that rule. And for that reason, you can see that I have a plan. If I go back to my jobs, for example, you can see this job was executed, right? It did tell me that there was a volume. If I search for this volume, it's exactly the volume that I was showing you just now. So if I click here, this is the volume. And that job actually executed, and then it was successful. What did it do? It basically created a backup. So it did create, like you can see, this is the snapshot. Let me see if I click on it, whether I'll find the snapshot. Yeah, I think it's this one, right? Okay, yeah, this is the snapshot. There are many things you can do. You can restore it, you can copy, there's just a lot that can happen with the backup service. The point is that your service in AWS, there are many areas you can do backups, whether it's many of your databases, you can back them up, depending on what it supports, right? But in here, for example, you can back up a number of services, right? So for example, let me see. So remember I told you in a backup, you have a plan. In there, you have a rule that just shows exactly how often, when should it be happening. But the assignment is the most important thing. So let's do assign resources, right? So let's do include all resource types, right? Let's do include specific types, and then let's see. So you can see a number of services here that you can back up, right? So DynamoDB, EBS, EC2, EFS, Neptune, Redshift, S3. There's just so many things that you can back up, right? With the backup service. And the beauty of this is that you can have a policy set up, like a rule set up, right? In as much as those resources match that rule, they'll be backed up. So it's easy for you to just go to one place and see all your compliance to say, yes, we have a policy in place that backs up all our resources every 1 hour or every 30 minutes, or like it depends on what you have designed there, right? So what it means is that, and it also helps you for compliance because sometimes some people don't even know their backup strategy, right? And that's what happens if you try to do like manual solutions or you're doing backup, individually, right? But AWS backup can actually centralize all your backup needs, and in one place you can actually see how you are more or less like compliant with your backup requirements, right? Some organizations, everybody has their own different requirements, but that's one thing you can do with AWS backup. So it's not something I want to stress on this call. Just know that there is a service there, and pretty much how I'm introducing it is you already know now that there is a service there that you can. It's very easy. You create a rule, you create a plan, and in there you create an assignment that assigns a resource to that plan, and for that reason, that resource is going to be backed up, right? So in our own case, it was a very small volume, 2 GB, but it was backed up for us. If we check snapshot, you can see there is a snapshot actually here. I think this is the snapshot I was talking about. It's different from the volumes, right? Remember, this is the volume, right? Volume ID 7A, but there's also the snapshot ID, right? So this is the one that was created as a result of that backup. And if I think if I did put retention to a day, so after a day, I'm not sure it's up to a day yet, but after a day, this will be deleted. So it depends on, remember, it still goes back to your RPO, your RTO, those needs. Those are the things that would sometimes backup and restore can work for some services. It's just that your RTO and RPO is really what can be impacted, right? Sometimes you want you want to be able to recover data that is, you want to be able to go, you want to recover fast. Maybe that's why in some cases backup and restore might not work for you, but it's also there as an option depending on the service you are dealing with, right? Cool. Let's continue. So that's really backup, and that brings us to the next one. So we just talked about backup, but there is also when you now want to do disaster recovery as a thing. So we just talked about how you can do backup and you're backing up your resources, but you can actually do elastic disaster recovery in AWS. There's just so many services. There's so many services, and that's why a lot of people, I think a lot of people are glued to AWS because yes, all your needs, a lot of your needs are covered, right? So there is a disaster recovery service, scalable, cost-effective disaster recovery for physical. So the same servers that we talked about before, you can now think about it. Where this is different, this backup, we're talking about your services in AWS, right? but you can actually use Elastic Disaster Recovery to do backup, like more or less like a disaster recovery plan for your on-premise environment, right? Or your physical virtual servers, right? The whole idea is that you can have continuous block level replication for your underlying file system, right, to AWS with minimal impact. Fast recovery with automated orchestration, and then you can also do point in time record recovery. So if you think about it, is we can categorize. If you look at the categories we looked at before, this is one that falls under pilot light, right? Because now it's like we talked about like more or less like your core service is running, but in a light for just running somewhere, and then if you ever need to do like a switch, then you just need to bring the other services up. But here you can basically do that same you can have a plan towards your how you do your disaster recovery, right? Using the Elastic Disaster Recovery service. Sub-second RPO with low RTO recovery capabilities. Now, when I talk about RPO and RTO, I'm comfortable talking about them because a slide before now, I just told you exactly what RPO is, recovery time, recovery points. Those things are important. You need to know them if you are in the tech, if you are in the cloud, if you are doing anything cloud, you need to know RPO, RTO, right? It's cost effective, pay as you go pricing model is how it works. Non-disruptive testing without affecting production workload. So if you were doing it, it's not going to affect your production workload because it has a staging area where it's going to make sure it is continuously replicating your workloads, right? You can have automatic failover and then failback with orchestrated recovery if you wanted. So if we go into the console, some of these things, and there's some text here, but let's just go into our account so that we'll see what that looks like. So we'll do disaster recovery. These are all related. Now, they are all related because when you move data to the cloud, you'll be thinking about backup, restore, recovery, all that, right? Because some people will be like, okay, maybe the cloud might not answer all my needs, but when you see all these service, maybe it gives you more confidence to be like, okay, you can see. I'll try to open this image. Let me see if I can open in a new tab. How it works. I'll zoom it in a bit. So quickly and reliably recover your on-premise, right, or cloud-based applications, right? So you do a setup, you launch test instances for non-disruptive tests, and then you operate. You basically maintain readiness with monitoring and periodic drills. You can do failback, and then you can also do the failover that I was actually talking about, right? But the whole idea is like there's a service. Obviously, it's not. It's just for you to know that it is a service. We can pretty much at an advanced case drill down further into how you can set up one, like mimic something, right? But just so you know, there is a service that can help you do that. You can basically start, you configure, there's a bunch of things that you need to do. But the whole idea is that you can actually have, set up disaster recovery. And I think it's still basically like the migration that we've seen before, right? Because here you are setting up replication server. What's a replication server? It's basically replicating something that is somewhere, keeping it there. Just replicating it, such that you can do a cutover. You can actually switch from here to here because you are guaranteed that what is on the left is constantly replicated to the right, right? So it's a good DR method to have, right? Obviously we can't set it up on this call, but just so you know, it's a service. And I want to believe that the way I've explained some of these services, we did talk about many services today, but I want to believe that you've learned something out of them. Maybe your curiosity have also increased. Maybe you take it further to go and dig deeper if you wanted. If you're curious, you can find out more. You can find out more about these services and see how they work. But remember, I still believe my audience are CCP, so cloud practitioners. We are still starting. We're just doing introduction, just so that you know why people move to the cloud, because they are covered. They can do disaster recovery. In this case, AWS, they can do disaster recovery. They can do backup. They can migrate. And they have a lot of cloud tools that helps them deploy things. So why wouldn't they move? So whenever you see companies moving, it's because they're covered. Because many of the things you want to think about is that I'm on premise. Now I have so many petabytes of data on premise. If I onboard to AWS, how am I going to move my data? That's why you have a migration service there, right? Migration service will help you do that. But even if you say, oh, I don't want to do, I'm not sure if the migration is going to work, you can also discover. You can do a discovery first. Understand if what you currently have and what is going to translate to in the cloud. You can also do even an evaluation, right? For you to see, do comparison and say this is where you are. But if you move to the cloud, This is the benefit, the cost benefit that you're going to get. So all these tools are here, and they're here, and it just depends. You probably might find yourself in a company where they are on-premise and they want to move to the cloud. You probably will do this. Sometimes you're in a company, they're already in the cloud. Maybe they are not doing a migration, right? But it's good. It's good you know these things, because it just helps you understand that, oh, the cloud is rich. Oh, the cloud has all these services, and maybe that's why a lot of people are in the cloud, and that's why they are very, very. It's easy for them to get resolved because they're covered. When you think about migration, or you think about discovery, or you think about even backups, right, and restore. Cool. Let's go to the slide. I think it's just one more slide that is left. Like I said, the slide was more than this. I had to churn it. I had to like compress it just to make sure I focus on the migration part of things. Okay, so that I don't mix it with other information. And I hope that you found value from me doing it that way. So let's look at the summary. We looked at the strategies, right? So the strategies, the 7 R's. Remember, it's 7 R's we looked at, right? The platforming, lift and shift, the rehosting. There's so many strategies that we did look at, right? And then we said Migration Hub is really, we saw migration service, we saw discovery service, we saw evaluator, and then we said the Migration Hub is really where you can it's like a centralized place where you can monitor your discovery, monitor your migration, just like we saw Security Hub also doing for us, right? We said application discovery, you're discovering your servers, right? Servers, your database, you're discovering them, you're using them to plan. You're planning the migration itself. And then the migration service is really what does the migration. And the migration service, honestly, is not hard. It's basically you connect your server to AWS, it will replicate your data, and then you can take that data from the replication server to its test server, and then you can test it. If it's working fine, then you can cut it off from there, right? But like I said, it's not something we can cover in just this small class, right? And then we talked about these strategies, right? Disaster recovery strategies. The strategies you want to do, whether it's pilot light, whether it's backup and restore, and all that is decided based on your RPO and your RTO needs, right? And then we also looked at Elastic Disaster Recovery, which is a service that AWS gives you for you to basically do disaster recovery, right? Remember, it's similar to a migration, but in this case, migration is you're moving data. But in this case, you're trying to do disaster recovery. The data is already fine somewhere, but now I'm replicating it somewhere just to have something I can fall back to, right? So understand the difference. And we saw backup for centralized data protection, right? EBS was the example I showed you, but we saw many services that are covered. So if you are in the cloud, you're using AWS cloud, and you're using many of those services, you can set up a centralized backup for them and have a single place where you can see how your backups are faring and what's exactly happening at the compliance level, right? Migration evaluator for assessment and planning, like I said, that's like the first place, right? Some people want to know if it's worth it going to the AWS, like if it's worth it going to the cloud. So that's where an evaluation is good. Like you compare, you more or less like, this is where I am right now and I want to move to the cloud. You do an evaluation and you can come up with like, strong use case to show maybe it's more expensive or it's cheaper, and then you can choose if you still want to go ahead with the migration, right? Cool. I hope you found value in the class. You got something today from the class. If you are just joining in, and then but this brings us to the end of the class, okay? And I hope that you found value from the class. Cool.